Shooting rampage shocked the residents of Chesapeake, Virginia in the United States.
Authorities say there are multiple fatalities. Many others are injured. More details on this later in the news. Good evening. I'm CJ Hero.
And I am Nina Rich Yelago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Now for the headlines. Philippine economy remains strong despite worldwide crisis. Commission on Appointments approves designations of Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno and Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin. Expert lauds President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s neutral stand with China and the United States. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. extends condolences to Indonesian President Joko Widodo. And United States downplays execution of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine. Secretary Benjamin Diokno asserts that despite worldwide crisis, the Philippine economy remains strong and far from an economic downturn. He also assures that the country's debt is manageable and should not be a cause for concern. Nadine Aguilar files this report.
The Philippine economy remains strong and far from recession. Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno made the assurance amid the high inflation or increases in prices of commodities, threat of food shortage, peso depreciation against the dollar, and the ballooning debt of the country. During his confirmation hearing at the Commission on Appointments, Diokno said the economy is strong, citing the decrease in the unemployment rate to 5%, the lowest data since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Aside from prudent spending, Diokno added the government is intensifying its digitalization program to accelerate business transactions.
Let's put it that way. No, it should not be a cause for concern. Although we came from a very low debt to GDP ratio of less than 40% before the pandemic. Now it went up to around 62% because of the pandemic, because we have to buy the vaccines, we have to beef up our health services, etc. But that should not be a cause for concern. That's very manageable compared to other countries. Nevertheless, the way we will address our debt to GDP ratio, which by the way is 30% foreign and 70% domestic, is we will outgrow our debt. That's why we have a very strong economic strategy.
The CA members questioned the finance chief on how the government is addressing the public affected by the high inflation. The lawmakers noted that even if NEDA proudly said there is economic growth, there is no trickling effect on the ordinary citizen.
Importante po talaga na, for example, the accelerating inflation. We really need to address that dahil talaga pong mahihirapan yung talagang vulnerable.
Increasing concern of many is the high level of public debts that the country now has. May we know from the nominee how he plans to address this concern?
Diokno replied that even if there is a crisis caused by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, prices of crude oil gradually stabilize. He added that there is also a commitment from the BPO industry for 1 million jobs, while remittances from overseas Filipino workers or OFWs remain strong, especially those from the medical workers, including doctors and nurses deployed in other countries. But he admitted that the agriculture sector is slow, which was the focus now of the Marcos administration's attention.
The peso is stabilizing, but I can assure you, Your Honor, that as long as we can grow at between 6.5 to 8%, all these objectives will be achieved. And in fact, we were pleasantly surprised that in the third quarter, our economy continued to grow at 7.7. That's better than expected. I think we will in fact, meet our target of 6.5 to 7.5 this year, more like 7.5 this year. So rest assured, Your Honor, that despite these concerns, we will continue to aim for those goals, which is reduce poverty, single digit, and then, of course, middle income status by as early as 2025, Your Honor. So let's not despair at this point, and let's not give up.
After a long deliberation, the CA approved the nomination and the ad interim appointment of Jokno. Nadine Aguilar, reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The information and business process management sector is projecting a 60 billion peso tax collection legacy for the Marcos administration by 2028. IBPAC Policy and Regulatory Affairs Chief Celeste Ilagan said they are projecting to create 1.1 million new jobs for the PPO sector. This would double the yearly tax collection of the government until 2028. For 2022, there are 1.44 million full-time or regular jobs created. Ilagan also said that despite the coronavirus pandemic, the IT BPO industry grew. Currently, the sector has contributed $30 billion in revenues to the government. Secretary Lucas Bersamin vowed there would be no repetition of the sugar importation controversy as his nomination passed the approval of the powerful Commission on Appointments. Mian Corvera reports.
The Commission on Appointments has approved the nomination and ad interim appointment of Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin. The nomination of the Executive Secretary, which was also former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, did not face any hurdle at the powerful CA. During his confirmation hearing, Bersamin vowed to avoid a repeat of the sugar fiasco incident, which caused the termination and resignation of some Agriculture and Sugar Regulatory Board officials. The controversy emanated from Sugar Order Number 4, allowing the importation of 300,000 metric tons of sugar, which was branded by the palace as unauthorized. Bersamin said there was a miscommunication and now he made sure that would never happen again by requiring complete staff work. He also reminded his team not to assume or presume that the president already approves certain acts.
The relative answer, ma'am, not in the sense that there is a general answer for that, but because we have to protect the privacy of the president in greater part. If there is an embarrassing information, we have first to consider the need for disclosure. If the need for disclosure overwhelms or overcomes the need to protect the office.
The Executive Secretary also said President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has signified his intention to appoint a permanent head for the Department of Agriculture. Senator Amy Marcos asked the former Chief Justice what is the Office of the Executive Secretary doing to fast-track the filling of vacant positions in government, especially the important posts like the Department of Health.
You have had an extensive career in the judiciary so that your mastery of law is unquestioned, but you have very little experience in the executive branch. So far, how many appointed posts, which are classified as coterminous, are still vacant? How many CESO positions are still occupied by non-CESO? Is there a timeline for filling in these vacancies? Because we are all getting impatient. Pakisabi sa ading ko.
Bersamin defended that they have a self-imposed deadline for December 31 to consider all coterminous appointments, but admitted that his team encountered problems due to lack of transition from former Executive Secretary Victor Rodriguez, who resigned in September. Bersamin said appointment would not affect the check and balance with the judiciary since he accepted the position after his term as magistrate. Bersamin served as the country's 25th Chief Justice before his appointment as Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Government Service Insurance System before accepting the position to serve as the second Executive Secretary of the Marcos administration.
Marami pong nagsabi sa akin nung ako'y tumanggap sa ganitong pwesto na ako'y na-demote daw. Hindi naman po siguro dahil wala na po ako sa hudikatura. nung tinanggap ko itong position na ito. Ang sa akin po, yung pagiging executive secretary ay hindi po pagbabago ng buhay. Kasi po ako'y isang ordinary citizen. There is no violation of any checks and balances or any other thing because my personality at the time that I accepted this position was no longer the personality of a judge. I may have that training and experience which I will find to be very useful in the discharge of my present position.
May Ann Corvera reporting for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
There will be enough supply of rice in the country until January next year. Federation of Free Farmers National Manager Raul Montemayor made the assurance following apprehensions that there will be a rice shortage caused by massive flooding in Pakistan, one of the largest rice importer supplier of the country. Montemayor added the peso depreciation against the dollar might also cause a possible decrease in the number of countries supplying rice in or to the Philippines. Montemayor called on the government to focus on and strengthen the country's rice production. An international security studies expert has noted the importance of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s neutral stance in its relations with China and the United States. Vin Pascua reports.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is carefully or delicately balancing its friendly relations with the two megapower countries, China and the United States. This was the observation of international security studies expert Professor Rommel Banlawi following the visit to the country of U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. Banlawi noted the importance of the neutrality President Marcos is exercising when it comes to the country's relation with China, considered a close relative of the Philippines and the United States, a longtime security ally.
Kumbaga binibigyan niya tayo ng flexibility na may pagkakataon na we will play the American card, ay may pagkakataon naman na we will play the China card. So we binabalance natin yung ating relasyon with the two major powers, considering that the United States is our security ally while China is our close neighbor.
The expert added that the friendly relationship with the Philippines is due to the mantra of flexible foreign policy that the government is exercising under the current administration. He said the president is considering the internal interests of the country in these relationships.
Our flexible foreign policy is guided by the mantra that in international politics, there's no permanent friend, no permanent enemy, but only permanent interest. So the mantra of national interest will dictate.
Moreover, Professor Banlawi hopes the upcoming state visit of President Marcos to China would result in much stronger relations with Beijing to avoid armed conflict in the disputed territories.
So we want to promote friendship with China. Kaya nga ang term ni President Xi Jinping at President Marcos na nag-meet sila sa sideline ng ASEAN Summit sa Bangkok, ay they will promote friendly consultations between the two parties in order to promote cooperation and avoid armed conflicts.
I am Vin Pascua reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
In a speech in Puerto Princesa, Palawan, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris once again underscored that international rules and norms must be upheld. She also urged all nations to respect the 2016 ruling of the UN Arbitral Tribunal. The Hague decision upholds the Philippines' exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea and rejected China's expansive claims in the area.
As an ally, the United States stands with the Philippines in the face of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea. As the United States has long made clear, we support the 2016 ruling of the UN Arbitral Tribunal, which delivered a unanimous and final decision firmly rejecting China's expansive South China Sea maritime claims. The tribunal's decision is legally binding and must be respected.
Harris also visited the fishing village of Tagburos to check on the progress of the $28 million United States Agency for International Development Fish Rights Initiative. The initiative is a 5-year program that started in 2018. It aims to counter illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which includes the waters of the West Philippine Sea.
The United States is proud of our long-standing ties with the people of the Philippines. I am here in Palawan to underscore the importance of our partnership in order to create economic opportunities, protect coastal ecosystems, maintain peace and stability, and uphold international rules and norms here in the South China Sea and around the world.
The Philippines maintains its accounts that the Chinese Coast Guard rudely took the floating debris that the naval forces recovered off the waters of Pagasa Island near Palawan. Senior Undersecretary Jose Faustino Jr., the Department of National Defense OIC, issued a statement after China denied that its Coast Guard forcibly took the floating object. Beijing's version of the incident was that the debris was taken by its authorities after a friendly consultation with the Philippine Coast Guard. However, an earlier report said the Chinese Coast Guard cut the Philippine vessel's towing line, blocked the Filipino ship, and rudely took the debris. For now, authorities are investigating the reported explosions, alleged artillery fire that happened after the said incident. Faustino also said that the DND, armed forces of the Philippines, and other government agencies are in the disputed area to ensure the safety of the troops present.
The United Filipino Consumers and Commuters, or UFCC, has filed a petition before the Supreme Court questioning the constitutionality of Republic Act 11659 or the Public Service Act of 2022. UFCC President Rodolfo Javellana Jr. said the law signed by President Rodrigo Duterte on March of this year has amended provisions of the 1987 Constitution classifying public utilities. Under the Public Service Act of 2022, railroads, railways, subways, seaports, airports, wire or wireless telecommunication services are classified as public utilities, which means it is now open for foreign ownership, which could endanger national security. UFCC legal advisor Larry Gadon said the new law is an outright violation of the Constitution, defining or highlighting the 60-40 ownership of these utilities. Gadon said the new Public Service Act of 2022 would open public utilities such as seaports, airports, and telecommunication services, in particular, to 100% foreign ownership. The petition identified the respondents as Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin, Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri, and House Speaker Martin Romualdez. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has urged Filipino scientists and researchers to stay in the country and become active partners of the government in nation building. The president made the call in his attendance during the opening ceremonies for the 2022 National Science and Technology Week. The president underscores the importance of science and technology to the country's development. In rallying for unity, the chief executive asked these scientists to partner with the government and dedicate their knowledge and skills, as well as to work harmoniously to uplift the lives of the Filipino people. He also vows the government would take further strides toward a more inclusive, more prosperous, and more sustainable nation.
I urge you to stay in the country as you pursue your career. We will continue to support you and continue to look to you to be active partners of the government.
During the event, the president also challenged the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST, and their partner institutions to provide more scholarships to Filipino students to develop a bigger pool of scientists, researchers, and innovators in the country.
Up next, Indonesia quake death toll rises to 268. Mass shooting at a U.S. Walmart store claims at least 7 lives. And the United States downplays the execution of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine. These and more stories when we return here on Mata ng Agila International.
This one. Ba't ako nangangatik?
Bulutong tubig yan! Uy! Uy!
Sino ka?
Consider na yung main source ng tubig. Ibig sabihin, mawawalan ng tubig!
Ingatan nyo to. Sa anniversary namin nung tiya nyo, ito ibinregalo ko. Kaya meron sa akin monumental value yan.
Putas, naibalik mo na ba? Wala talaga!
Usapang internet connection.
Bakit po nananatiling mabagal pa rin ang internet?
Over-subscribe, lack of infrastructure. 30% of our Filipino are not reachable by this technology yet.
Posible ba ang Digital Pilipinas? Yan ang hahanapan ng sagot kasama si Atty. Sal Panelo at Dennis Anthony Uy, CEO ng Converge ICT. Sa Counterpoint, tuwing Miyerkules alas 10:30 ng gabi dito sa Net 25.
Meron din isang Dennis Uy na sumikat. Napagkakamalan ba kayo?
This portion?
The news continues here on Mata ng Agila International. The number of fatalities from the earthquake that happened in Java, the largest island in Indonesia, has increased to 268 on Tuesday as rescuers continue looking for survivors. Family members have begun to bury their loved ones. Rescue efforts focused on any survivors still buried beneath debris in areas made difficult to reach by the quake's mass of obstacles thrown onto the roads. The shallow 5.6 magnitude quake that occurred on Monday had its epicenter close to the town of Cianjur, where most of the fatalities, injuries, and possible trapped people occurred due to building collapses and landslides. Later on Tuesday, Suharyanto, the chief of Indonesia's National Disaster Mitigation Agency, or BNPB, announced during a press conference that the death toll had in fact increased sharply once from 162 to now 268. The official, who goes by one name like many Indonesians, stated that more than 1,000 people have been hurt and at least 151 people are still missing. President Joko Widodo paid a visit to the region on Tuesday, providing compensation to victims and directing relief organizations to activate their personnel.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has expressed his sympathy and condolences to Indonesia following a strong earthquake that killed at least 268 individuals. In a tweet, President Marcos Jr. said he expressed his deepest condolences to President Joko Widodo for the loss of lives caused by the 5.6 magnitude earthquake that hit Java, Indonesia. The chief executive also conveyed the heartfelt prayers of the Filipino people to go out to the families of those lost and affected by this devastation. According to reports, residents affected by the tremor are now appealing for food and water.
A magnitude 6.1 earthquake struck northwest Turkey during Wednesday's early hours, injuring at least 50 people. The shallow tremor struck about 170 kilometers east of Istanbul, the country's largest city, where it was strongly felt. According to a Duce resident, the big noise and tremor woke them up, and in panic, they got out of their homes and waited outside. Meanwhile, one person was reported being seriously hurt after jumping from the balcony out of panic. As per Interior Minister Suleyman Soylu reports, 70 aftershocks had been recorded. The quake ruined a few barns, but as of now, there were no reports of heavy damage or building collapses. Meanwhile, authorities announced schools in the area, as well as in Sakarya provinces, will be closed on Wednesday. One is confirmed dead and at least 18 people are wounded in explosions that occurred at 2 bus stops in Jerusalem this Wednesday. Jerusalem ambulance services reported that at least 2 are in critical condition. According to local media, the second explosion took place in another part of the city. Although authorities have not yet confirmed the cause of the explosions and said the investigation is still continuing, Israeli Army radio insisted that the explosion was caused by an installed device on the site. Syrian fighters take part in military drills by the Turkish-backed Süleyman Shah division in the opposition-held Afrin region. This as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan vows that Turkey will soon unleash a ground operation into Syria against Kurdish targets in defiance of mounting international pressure. Ankara launched a series of airstrikes in Operation Claw Sword on Sunday, hitting dozens of Kurdish targets across Iraq and Syria. Ankara announced that its military was once again on top of the terrorists' list. The air raids followed a bombing in Istanbul that killed 6 people and wounded 81. Turkey blames the attack on the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or the PKK, which is blacklisted as a terror group by the European Union and the U.S. The Turkish leader has threatened a new military operation into northern Syria since May and upped those threats in the wake of this month's attack. Police and local officials in the U.S. state of Virginia said 7 people were killed and others were wounded in a shooting rampage at a Walmart store in Chesapeake, Virginia. According to the Chesapeake Police Department, the assailant was also killed during the incident. However, police spokesperson Leo Kosinski did not provide any further information about how the suspect died, their identity, or whether the individual had any known connection to the Walmart store. As of now, the police are not seeking anyone else in connection with the shooting. Meanwhile, the exact number of the injured people was not confirmed, but the victims were immediately transported to multiple area hospitals. Virginia State Senator Louise Lucas, who represents the area, expressed her shock that America's latest mass shooting occurred in a Walmart in her district. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres warns against dangerous rhetoric stoking tensions among nuclear-armed rivals. At a conference in Morocco, Guterres says growing divisions are threatening global peace and security, provoking new confrontations and making it all the more difficult to resolve old conflicts. The UN chief says the world is already dangerously close to the edge on the climate, while hate speech and disinformation are proliferating. Guterres says forces of discord are waking up old demons, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. In Croatia, President Zoran Milanovic says Croatia cannot train Ukrainian troops on its territory as that would be unconstitutional. Prior to Milanovic's statement, Defense Minister Mario Banožić said Zagreb a draft proposal for Croatian participation in the European Union military assistance mission. The EU aid program reportedly involves training around 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers on the bloc's territory. However, Milanovic states that the Croatian constitution does not give Banožić grounds to make such a proposal. He also noted that the Croatian constitution does not allow Ukrainian troops to set foot on Croatian soil. Moreover, Milanovic argues that Kyiv is not a member of any alliance Zagreb belongs to. He also contends that there are no international treaties otherwise regulating Kyiv and Zagreb's status. Aside from Croatia, EU members Austria and Hungary have already said they will not participate in the EU aid mission either. A U.S. war crimes envoy admits growing concerns over videos of alleged executions of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine. In a telephone briefing, U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice Beth Van Schack says it's really important to emphasize that the laws of war apply to all parties equally. She also argues that allegations against Kiev's forces pale in comparison to Moscow's alleged atrocities. Van Schack maintains that Ukraine has dealt with allegations of wrongdoings more responsibly. To be more specific, the envoy stresses that Moscow inevitably responds with propaganda, whereas Kiev authorities have generally acknowledged abuses and denounced them. The videos purporting to show Russian prisoners being executed were verified by an American newspaper. According to the report, the videos are authentic and it happened last month. The American news agency also asked the UN to investigate the killings. Meanwhile, though Kiev officials denied that Ukrainian forces executed Russian prisoners, the Kremlin vowed to hold the perpetrators accountable. Coming up, U.S. Supreme Court backs House effort to obtain Trump tax returns. Outgoing Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro challenges election loss in court. And U.S. President Joe Biden approves emergency declaration for New York State. More global news coming your way. Meron mata ng Agila International returns.
It is inevitable that we adapt to the latest technology in order to be ahead of the game. One such technology is blockchain and how it is creating waves in the digital space as the go-to decentralized ledger of data. Sounds intimidating. Then let us learn together from the experts we spoke with at the first Global Blockchain Summit in Bataan.
Blockchain will be actually the future, right? Pero yung fundamental, kailangan may ayos. Bago ka naman dumating doon, at least educate, create awareness, and step-by-step model.
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos, Sunday, 9 p.m.
This portion is brought to you by...
The U.S. Supreme Court has cleared the way for former President Donald Trump's tax forms to be released to the Democrat-led Ways and Means Committee. The said congressional committee has been investigating Trump's conduct in office and has been asking for his tax returns since 2019. But Trump's lawyer had argued that the committee was overly broad in its requests and should review 1 year's worth of audit documents at most. Yet the Supreme dismissed Trump's appeal. The court's brief unsigned order also did not note dissent from any of the judges. News sources say the move is a blow to Trump, who has for years kept his returns sealed. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said members of Congress will promptly receive and review Trump's tax returns. However, news reports say the congressional investigation into Trump's tax affairs is likely to be dropped when Republicans take control of the House. To formally contest the results of this year's elections, outgoing Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has filed a petition with Brazil election authorities. Bolsonaro narrowly lost a runoff vote last month to rival Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Bolsonaro and his team alleged a malfunction of 5 models of ballot boxes and that any votes cast through them should be annulled. The petition also cites a technical report by the Legal Voting Institute, which claims that removing those votes would hand Bolsonaro victory.
The Superior Electoral Court has responded to the petition, stating that since the same voting machines were used in the first round of elections, Bolsonaro and his party must amend their complaint to include those results. The election authorities said the amendment must be done for the process to make its way through the courts. Bolsonaro and his petitioners are given 24 hours to amend their petition. Mexico's President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador announces that the Pacific Alliance Summit to be held in Mexico on the 24th and 25th of November is suspended. Obrador says this is due to the absence of the President of Peru, Pedro Castillo. Castillo was not allowed by the Peruvian Congress to leave the country. Meanwhile, Castillo calls for the Pacific Alliance group to meet in Peru and says he wants to host the meeting and chair the group for a limited period. Castillo, who is in power since July 2021 for a 5-year term, is under investigation for alleged corruption. He has already faced 2 impeachment attempts in the right-wing dominated Congress. Obrador says they are considering the possibility of doing an event in Peru. In the U.S., top infectious disease doctor Anthony Fauci, who was a constant presence during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, gives his final White House briefing before retiring at the end of the year. Fauci announced Monday he will leave government service after more than 50 years. He says he would be stepping down as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, and as chief medical advisor to President Joe Biden. The 81-year-old, who has served under 7 presidents, starting with President Ronald Reagan, says he would like people to remember that he has given his all to his work.
Although COVID is really, really very important, it is a fragment of the total 40 years that I've been doing it. So I'll let other people judge the value or not of my accomplishments. But what I would like people to remember about what I've done is that every day for all of those years, I've given it everything that I have, and I've never left anything on the field.
Fauci has helmed the United States response to infectious disease outbreaks since the 1980s, from HIV/AIDS to COVID. A driver recounts how armed men stopped him and burned his truck, along with 4 others on a highway in northeast Colombia near the Venezuelan border. According to local police, the National Liberation Army, or ELN guerrilla, and the FARC dissidents operate in that region. The burning of vehicles occurs with regularity by illegal armed groups on different roads in Colombia. This is a way of threatening transporters, the general population, and also to exert territorial control. After a 3-year hiatus, Colombia's government and the ELN resumed formal peace talks in Venezuela on November 21. West African nations meet with European leaders for talks on homegrown ways to prevent jihadist conflict in the Sahel, threatening to engulf countries on the Gulf of Guinea. Coastal states Ghana, Benin, Togo, and Ivory Coast face increasing threats and attacks from Islamist militants across their northern borders with Burkina Faso and Niger. The summit in Ghana's capital, Accra, also comes as more Western nations have withdrawn peacekeepers from Mali after its military junta strengthened cooperation with Russia. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo says worsening Sahel security is threatening to engulf the entire West African region. He says terrorist groups, emboldened by their apparent success in the region, are looking for new operational grounds. This, he says, is a development that has triggered a southward drift of the menace.
Our assessment points to the fact that support from members of the international community will be needed, but we remain firm in our commitment to shoulder a greater part of the responsibility required whilst engaging international partners who are willing to respect our status as a homegrown initiative.
Under the so-called Accra Initiative, heads of state from the Gulf of Guinea and leaders from Niger and Burkina Faso meet in Ghana with representatives from the West African bloc, ECOWAS, the EU, Britain, and France.
November 25 is International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. As part of its observance, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres sent a message about consigning violence against women and girls to the history book. In New York, Joan Soriano reports.
Globally, every 11 minutes, a woman or girl is killed by an intimate partner or family member. According to the United Nations, other stresses from the COVID-19 pandemic to economic turmoil have resulted in even more physical and verbal abuse. UN General Antonio Guterres says women and girls also face rampant online violence, from misogynistic hate speech to sexual harassment, image abuse, and grooming by predators. He says violence against women and girls is the most pervasive human rights violation in the world. Guterres says this discrimination, violence, and abuse, targeting half of humanity, comes at a steep cost. He says it limits women and girls' participation in all walks of life, denies their basic rights and freedoms, and blocks the equal economic recovery and sustainable growth the world needs. The UN chief calls for transformative action that ends violence against women and girls, which means governments designing, funding, and implementing national action plans to tackle the scourge. He says it means ensuring that laws are implemented and respected so survivors see their rights to justice and support upheld. This year's theme is Unite, activism to end violence against women and girls. Guterres says it means standing with people around the world calling for change and supporting survivors of violence. Statistics show that globally, an estimated 736 million, or 1 in 3 women, have been subjected to physical and/or sexual intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their life. That is 30% of women aged 15 and older. Joanne Soriano, New York, New York. Magdanang Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
Members of leftist social movements march in Buenos Aires to protest against the government's economic measures and poverty. They also demand salaries that reach inflation as well as better and decent jobs. Protesters say they need to get out of poverty and work a decent job. They say soup kitchens are empty. Labor union leader Eduardo Beliboni says they demand a minimum wage that allows workers to live. Beliboni says in Argentina, there are 6 million needy people, those who find it difficult to feed themselves. He says workers have to unite nationally and internationally to fight for a way out of what he calls the capitalist crisis.
Deputy Director for the United States at the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Johanna Tablada, talks about migration ahead of the U.S.-Cuba migration accords. Tablada says the Biden administration has not reversed the sanctions, but it has made adjustments to the way it implements the policy. Trump's maximum pressure policy has not yet been lifted. Some of these adjustments are related to the resumption in January of the granting of immigrant visas at its consulate in Havana, the resumption of remittances, and reactivation of flights to the province. However, they have not managed to reverse the migratory wave provoked by Trump's economic pressure policy still in force against Cuba. Cuba insists that there is a direct link between the growing flow of Cuban migrants to the U.S. and the tightening of the embargo against the island. The U.S. Bureau of Customs and Border Protection says there are about 224,000 Cubans entering the U.S. without documents until October 2022, most of them through the Mexican border. This figure is much higher than the 39,000 in the previous year.
U.S. President Joe Biden has approved an emergency declaration for the state of New York after historic snowfall. According to the White House, Biden ordered federal assistance to supplement state and local response efforts to address the aftermath of a severe winter storm and snowstorm. The U.S. National Weather Service said the storm set a state record for the most snowfall within a 24-hour period. According to a statement issued by New York Governor Kathy Hochul's office, the emergency declaration is for the counties of Cattaraugus, Chautauqua, Erie, Genesee, Jefferson, Lewis, Niagara, Oneida, Oswego, St. Lawrence, and Wyoming. These affected areas experienced consistent snowfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour, and some saw a peak of 6 inches of snowfall an hour. The U.S. National Weather Service said the intense snowfall created extremely dangerous travel conditions. When Mata ng Agila International comes back, PC maker HP to lay off up to 6,000 workers. France defender Lucas Hernandez out of World Cup. And Celtic coins worth millions of euros get stolen from German museum. Stay tuned for more news here on Mata ng Agila International.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang angking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
The sprawling cacti fill a valley in Zelvan district in central Tunisia, where producers are hoping the spiky fruit can fuel a cosmetics cash-in. Over 25 years, prickly pear was known by people as a wonder plant, which has the ability to adapt and produce in difficult conditions and has the potential for industrial processing. According to authorities and operators at the national level, prickly pear has been a real source of socio-economic growth in Tunisia, having a total area of 600,000 hectares. In most cases, prickly pear is processed as a prickly pear oil, while some remaining fruits were sold as the mouth-watering fruit. Aside from contributing to socio-economic growth, the prickly pear also helps to water scarcity conditions to prolonged drought caused by climate change. In light of the deteriorating economic climate, the Hewlett-Packard Company, also known as HP Incorporated, said on Tuesday it will lay off thousands of employees over the next 3 years. The PC maker announced the major job cuts after its dull quarterly earnings report on Tuesday afternoon, indicating a more than 11% drop compared to the same period last year. From a total of 51,000 employees, HP aims to diminish the figure by approximately 4,000 to 6,000 employees, which are set to be completed on the end of 2025. According to HP President and CEO Enrique Lores, the job layoffs will be the company's future-ready strategy that will enable them to better serve their customers and drive long-term value creation by reducing the costs and reinvesting in key growth initiatives to position the company or the business for the future.
Violent protests have broken out around Foxconn's best iPhone factory in central China. Local reports say workers clashed with security personnel over pay and living conditions at the plant. In videos shared on Weibo and Twitter that have been verified by news agencies, hundreds of Foxconn workers can be seen marching on a road. Security guards can be seen beating a prone man while protesters mob a police car. Other reports say many workers have allegedly been injured after riot police arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, Foxconn denied it had housed recruits with COVID-positive staff at the Zhengzhou factory. Big tech Apple did not respond to requests for any comments about the recent Foxconn incident.
The U.S. Justice Department says police in Estonia have arrested 2 men suspected of running a $575 million cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme. The Estonian pair, Sergei Potapenko and Ivan Turigin, both aged 37, are alleged to have defrauded thousands of victims. The complaint states that the defendants allegedly tricked people into investing in a cryptocurrency mining service called Hashflare and a fake virtual bank called Polybius. Potapenko and Turigin purportedly used shell companies to launder criminal proceeds. The Justice Department also discloses that the defendants bought at least 75 properties and luxury cars. According to a statement, Potapenko and Turigin are being held in prison pending extradition to the U.S. They're facing conspiracy to commit wire fraud, 16 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. Each of these crimes is punishable by up to 20 years in prison.
France defender Lucas Hernandez will miss the rest of the World Cup after injuring his knee in the defending champions' opening victory against Australia, the team said on Wednesday. In the 4-1 win over the Socceroos on Tuesday, the Bayern Munich defender tore an anterior cruciate ligament, which enlisted him as one of the injured players of the team. According to coach Didier Deschamps, Lucas is a fighter and they lose a vital player. Due to the squad's growing number of injured players, Deschamps must juggle his options as he was left to choose only among 24 players. On the other hand, Lucas's injury made the team eager and stronger to continuously fight in the cup in search of a chance to be able to bag their long-awaited title.
It was like a scene from a heist movie. A highly valuable collection of Celtic coins that date back to the 3rd century BC were pilfered from Manching, a Roman and Celtic museum in Germany. Mayor Herbert Nerb says the heist was done by professionals who hijacked phones and internet services in the otherwise high-security museum. The stolen collection of 450 gold coins, according to police, is worth several millions of euros and has been the highlight of Manching Museum. To Marcus Bloom, Bavaria's Minister of Science and Art, the incident is what he calls a disaster, as the coins were a testament to their history and are irreplaceable.
With hammer and saw, Noor Al-Janabi is building her latest creation, a candy pink sofa in the carpentry workshop she runs in male-dominated and conservative Iraq. According to the 29-year-old carpenter, furniture maker, and mother of 4, at first her relatives criticized her for being a woman and an amateur in a men's trade. However, criticisms never stopped Janabi to keep going. For several years, Janabi has been making furniture, and a few months ago, she ventured into carpentry.
Her house was turned into a workshop where she has 4 employees and one of them is her retired husband. As of now, her order book is full, with new lounges starting at a cool 700,000 dinars. According to a study published in 2021 by 2 UN agencies, while most Iraqis consider tertiary education equally important for men and women, attitudes toward equal rights in employment are discriminatory against women. Well, we are halfway through the week, and here is a quote from Agustin Mandino, an American author. Take the attitude of a student. Never be too big to ask questions and never know too much to learn something new. I love this.
Yes, and we are students until the day we die.
When you stop learning, you stop growing.
Exactly.
Remember that. Keep learning. And that's a wrap for tonight's news. Catch the latest updates on our social media channels, so you keep learning. I am CJ Hero.
And I'm Nina Richie Alago Flores. Stay tuned for Attorney Sal Panelo's Counterpoint with Converge ICT CEO Dennis Anthony Uy. This is Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
Percent